The bustling streets of Los Angeles were alive with activity, a symphony of honking horns, scattered laughter, and the quiet hum of countless lives moving forward. Among them was Keanu Reeves, a man adored by millions but known to very few. For Keanu, fame had never been a substitute for connection. He found solace in everyday routines, moments of normalcy that reminded him of his humanity. That evening, he stepped into a modest corner store near his neighborhood, hoping to escape the demands of his celebrity for just a little while. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as Keanu entered, nodding politely to the cashier who barely glanced up. He appreciated the anonymity, relishing these fleeting moments when he could blend into the crowd. He grabbed a basket and made his way down the aisles, scanning the shelves for the few essentials he needed. But it wasn't the humdrum task of shopping that captured his attention. It was the quiet presence of someone else in the store. Near the baby supplies section stood a young woman, her shoulders hunched as though carrying an invisible weight. Her dark curls framed a face that seemed much older than it should have been, marked not by age but by worry and exhaustion. She couldn't have been older than 20. Clutched in her hands was a small pack of diapers, her fingers gripping it tightly as though afraid it might vanish. Her clothes, though clean, were worn, and her sneakers had seen better days. Keanu slowed his pace, pretending to browse the adjacent aisle while his eyes lingered on the girl. She moved with hesitation, as if calculating every cent in her head. She placed the diapers into her basket, then paused, removing them again with a sigh. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she picked up a smaller pack, her shoulders sinking further. It wasn't pity that rooted Keanu to the spot. It was something deeper, an unshakable feeling that this young woman was fighting a battle she wasn't meant to face alone. He told himself to mind his own business, to respect her privacy, but something in her demeanor tugged at him. He watched as she made her way to the cashier, paying in crumpled bills and coins before leaving the store with a single small bag. As she stepped outside, Keanu felt his feet moving almost involuntarily, following her out into the cool evening air. The girl walked briskly, her head down, as though she wanted to disappear into the city's shadows. Keanu kept a careful distance, his mind racing. What was he doing? He wasn't even sure, but something told him he couldn't just let her vanish into the night. Her loneliness was palpable, a silent scream for help that no one else seemed to hear. She turned down a quieter street, her steps slowing as she approached a modest apartment building. Keanu hesitated, lingering near a lamppost. The building was old, its paint peeling and windows clouded with grime. She disappeared inside, leaving Keanu standing alone under the dim light. For a moment, he considered walking away, convincing himself that he had done enough simply by noticing her struggle. But then he thought of her eyes, how hollow they had looked, and the weight in her hands as she carried that small bag. Before he could second-guess himself, Keanu moved toward the building. He pressed the intercom, his heart pounding as he scrambled for an excuse. But before he could say anything, the door buzzed open, and he slipped inside. The hallway was dimly lit and eerily quiet, the faint smell of dampness hanging in the air. He climbed the stairs, his footsteps echoing softly, unsure of what he would find or what he would say. As he reached the second floor, he heard it, the soft sound of a baby crying. It came from the end of the hall, where the door was slightly ajar. Keanu approached cautiously, his chest tightening. Through the crack, he saw the girl kneeling on the floor, gently rocking a tiny baby in her arms. The room was sparse, its walls bare, and the furniture limited to a worn-out couch and a mattress on the floor. Keanu's breath caught in his throat as he watched her. She was humming softly, her voice trembling as though she was holding back tears. The baby quieted, its tiny fingers clutching at her shirt. Keanu wanted to knock, to step inside, but he froze, overwhelmed by the raw vulnerability of the scene before him. Then, without warning, the girl glanced toward the door. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Keanu took a step back, raising his hands as if to apologize, but before he could say anything, the door creaked open further. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice wary but not unkind. She held the baby protectively, her posture tense. Keanu opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say? that he had followed her because he couldn't ignore the weight she carried, that her loneliness mirrored something he recognized in himself. Instead, he simply said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. I noticed you seem like you could use a little help." The girl's eyes softened for a fraction of a second before her guard returned. "I'm fine," she said, though the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her. Keanu nodded, taking a small step back. "Okay," he said quietly. "But if you ever need anything at all, I'm here." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small card and placing it on the floor. "No strings. Just call me." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Why would you do that?" she asked, her tone a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Keanu paused, glancing back at her. "Because I know what it's like to feel alone," he said simply, his voice heavy with unspoken memories. The girl stared at him for a moment, then nodded, the faintest hint of gratitude in her eyes. Keanu walked away, his heart heavy yet strangely hopeful. He didn't know if she would ever call, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't just walk away from the connection he had felt. Little did he know, this encounter was only the beginning of a story that would change both their lives forever. As Keanu walked away from the apartment building, his mind was a flurry of thoughts and emotions. The young woman's eyes stayed with him, haunting in their mixture of strength and weariness. He replayed the moment in his head, the sparsely furnished room, the baby's soft cry, the way she clutched the child like it was the only thing anchoring her to this world. Her guarded response had been expected, but it didn't make it any easier to leave her behind. That night, Keanu sat in his kitchen, nursing a cup of tea. The quiet of his home, which normally brought him peace, felt suffocating now. He couldn't shake the feeling that he should have done more. But what could he do? He didn't even know her name. The card he had left her carried only his number and a simple note. "If you ever need help, don't hesitate." It was a gesture he hoped would speak louder than any words. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and commitments. Keanu moved through them as he always did, with a quiet professionalism that belied his private nature. But in the back of his mind, the girl and her baby lingered. He found himself scanning the streets as he drove through the city, wondering if he might see her again. At night, he replayed the brief exchange in his mind, questioning if he had done the right thing by walking away. Meanwhile, across the city, the young woman sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the card Keanu had left. It sat on the corner of the worn coffee table, a stark contrast to the clutter of baby bottles and unpaid bills. She didn't know what to make of him. Who was this stranger who had followed her home, only to offer help with no explanation? She had recognized him, of course. Who wouldn't? But the idea that Keanu Reeves had stepped into her life felt surreal, like a scene from a movie she wasn't sure she belonged in. Her name was Amara, and she was no stranger to struggle. At just 19, she had already lived through more hardship than most people could imagine. Her parents had passed away when she was a teenager, leaving her to navigate the world on her own. Then came the baby, her sweet little Ava, born into a life of uncertainty but loved with every fiber of Amara's being. She worked long hours at a diner, scraping together just enough to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table, but it was never enough. The nights were the hardest, when Ava would cry, and Amara would sit by the window, wondering how she was going to make it through another day. She picked up the card again, turning it over in her hand. The name on it was simple, just Keanu, in small, neat handwriting. She didn't trust easily. Life had taught her that much, but there was something about the way he had looked at her that night. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, something that felt almost like understanding. Still, she hesitated. What could he possibly want with someone like her? And why did he care? Keanu, on the other hand, found himself drawn back to the neighborhood near her apartment. He told himself it was a coincidence, that he was simply out for a drive, but deep down, he knew the truth. There was an invisible thread pulling him toward her, a need to know that she and the baby were okay. He parked his car a few blocks away and walked through the streets, his hands in his pockets as he tried to look inconspicuous. The building loomed ahead, its weathered facade blending into the grayness of the city. He didn't go inside, but he lingered nearby, his eyes scanning the windows for any sign of her. It wasn't until the fifth day after their encounter that Amara finally picked up her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen, hesitating as doubt flooded her mind. What if this was a mistake? What if he didn't mean what he said? But then she thought of Ava, of the nights spent worrying about how she would buy more diapers or pay the rent. Swallowing her fear, she dialed the number on the card. Keanu was at home when the call came. He had just finished reading a script and was preparing to settle in for the evening when his phone buzzed. He didn't recognize the number, but something told him to answer. "Hello," he said, his voice calm but curious. There was a pause on the other end, and for a moment, he thought it might be a wrong number. But then he heard her voice, soft, hesitant, and laced with uncertainty. "Hi, it's me, the girl from the other night." Keanu sat up straighter, his heart skipping a beat. "Amara," he said, her name coming to him instinctively. He had heard the cashier call her that as she paid for the diapers. "I'm so glad you called." There was a long silence, and Keanu could almost feel her wrestling with her decision. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know why I'm doing this," she admitted. I'm not sure what else to do." "You don't have to explain," Keanu said gently. "I'm just glad you reached out. How are you? How's your little one?" "She's okay," Amara replied, her voice softening slightly. "I'm okay. It's just hard." Keanu nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I understand," he said, and he did. Though his struggles were different, he knew what it was like to feel alone, to carry a weight that seemed impossible to bear. "Amara, I meant what I said. If there's anything you need, anything at all, I'm here." Her voice wavered as she responded, the vulnerability in her words cutting through his heart. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Keanu took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Because I know what it's like to feel like the world is against you," he said. "And because I believe in helping where I can. Sometimes, we all need a little kindness." Amara didn't reply immediately, but when she did, her voice was quieter than before. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know what to say, but thank you." They ended the call with no concrete plan, but Keanu felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For Amara, it was a glimmer of hope, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. Neither of them could have predicted what would come next. The days after Amara's call were a mix of cautious hope and lingering doubt. She couldn't shake the feeling that reaching out to Keanu had been a mistake, that he would regret offering his help once he saw how messy her life really was. But there was also a small, fragile part of her that wanted to believe in his sincerity. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her with anything other than indifference or judgment. For Alba's sake, she told herself, she needed to take a chance. Keanu, on the other hand, couldn't stop thinking about her. Her voice over the phone had been so full of pain, but also a quiet resilience that he found deeply moving. He wanted to do more, but he knew he had to tread carefully. He didn't want to overwhelm her or make her feel like a charity case. So he decided to start small. That afternoon, he stopped by a local store and filled a basket with diapers, baby formula, and a few small toys. The cashier raised an eyebrow as he checked out, but Keanu just smiled and shrugged. When he arrived at her building, he hesitated for a moment before knocking on her door. The sound of soft footsteps approached, and the door opened just a crack. Amara's wary eyes met his, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. Then her gaze shifted to the bag in his hand, and her brows furrowed. "What's this?" she asked, her voice cautious. "Just a little something for Ava," Keanu said, holding the bag out to her. "I figured it might help." Amara hesitated, her pride warring with her gratitude. Finally, she took the bag, her fingers brushing against his for just a moment. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly, but her eyes softened as she glanced inside. "I know," Keanu replied, "but I wanted to." She opened the door a little wider, allowing him a glimpse of the room beyond. It was just as sparse as before, but now there was a faint smell of something cooking on the stove, and Ava was lying on the mattress, cooing softly. The sight of the baby made Keanu's heart ache in a way he hadn't expected. He crouched down slightly, giving her a warm smile. "She's beautiful," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. Amara's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. "Thanks," she said, her tone softening. "She's my everything." Over the next few weeks, Keanu found himself visiting more often. At first, Amara was hesitant, but slowly, she began to let her guard down. They would talk while Ava napped, their conversations ranging from light topics like favorite movies to the heavier burdens Amara carried. Keanu listened without judgment, offering quiet encouragement where he could. He learned about her struggles, how she had dropped out of school to work, how she barely scraped by each month, how the father of her child had vanished the moment she told him she was pregnant. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Amara shared something she had never told anyone. Sometimes, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "I wonder if I'm enough for her. If she'd be better off with someone else." Keanu's chest tightened at her words. He leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Amara, you are more than enough," he said firmly. "You're her mother. You're her world, and I can see how much you love her. That's what matters." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked away, embarrassed. It's so hard. And I'm so tired." "I know," Keanu said gently. "But you don't have to do it alone. You got me now." Amara nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and fear. Letting someone in felt dangerous, but with Keanu, it also felt safe. Meanwhile, Keanu's involvement in Amara's life didn't go unnoticed. A few neighbors began to whisper, their curiosity piqued by the sight of the famous actor coming and going from the building. One particularly nosy woman cornered Amara in the hallway one afternoon, her tone sharp with suspicion. "What's he doing here all the time?" the woman asked, her gaze narrowing. "You two got something going on." Amara's cheeks flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. "It's none of your business," she replied, her voice tight. The woman huffed, crossing her arms. "Just seems odd, is all. A guy like him hanging around someone like you." The words stung, but Amara refused to let them show. She turned and walked away, her heart pounding. She hated the way people judged her, as if her struggles somehow made her less deserving of kindness. Later, when she told Keanu about the encounter, he simply shrugged. "Let them talk," he said with a small smile. "I'm here for you and Ava, not them." But the tension only grew. One night, as Keanu was leaving, he noticed a man loitering near the entrance to the building. The man's clothes were rumpled, and his eyes darted nervously as he smoked a cigarette. Keanu felt a prickle of unease, but didn't say anything. The next day, Amara mentioned seeing the same man hanging around, and a flicker of fear passed through her eyes. "He was asking about me," she said, her voice low. "I think he knows Ava's father." Keanu's jaw tightened. "Do you think he's dangerous?" "I don't know," Amara admitted, "but I don't want to find out." The situation added a new layer of tension to their lives. Keanu began to worry about Amara and Ava's safety, but he didn't want to overstep. He started parking further away and taking different routes to the building, hoping to avoid drawing attention. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something neither of them was prepared for. As the days turned into weeks, their bond grew stronger. Amara began to trust Keanu in a way she hadn't trusted anyone in years, and Keanu found himself opening up to her in ways he hadn't expected. But the shadow of the man outside lingered, casting a dark cloud over their fragile sense of peace. And then, one night, everything changed. The air outside Amara's building was unusually still that night, a silence that felt heavier than usual. Keanu could feel it as he stepped out of his car, his instincts sharpening like they always did when something felt off. He had promised to drop by with a bag of groceries and spend a little time with Ava while Amara caught up on her studies. But as he approached the entrance, the flicker of his shadow caught his attention. The man was back. He leaned against the wall near the doorway, his posture casual but his eyes watchful. Keanu recognized him instantly, the same man who had been loitering before. His gut tightened as he walked past, pretending not to notice, but he could feel the man's gaze following him. Inside the building, his footsteps quickened, a growing sense of unease urging him to reach Amara's door as fast as possible. When she opened the door, her face lit up with relief at the sight of him. But Keanu noticed the shadows under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. She'd been living on edge ever since the man first appeared, and it was beginning to take its toll. "He's outside again," Keanu said softly as he stepped inside, keeping his voice low so as not to alarm her. Amara's face fell, her eyes darting toward the window. "I thought he might be," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I keep hearing noises at night, like someone's out there. I don't know what he wants, but I'm scared, Keanu." Keanu placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this," he said firmly. "We'll figure it out. I won't let anything happen to you or Ava." But even as he said the words, he couldn't ignore the nagging worry at the back of his mind. Who was this man, and what did he want? If he was connected to Ava's father, that only made things more complicated. Keanu had no intention of letting anyone harm Amara or her daughter, but he couldn't deny that the situation was becoming more dangerous by the day. That night, after Ava had fallen asleep, Keanu and Amara sat in the dimly lit living room, their voices hushed as they discussed their next steps. "Maybe I should talk to him," Keanu suggested cautiously. "Find out what he wants." Amara's eyes widened in alarm. "No," she said quickly. "You don't know what he's capable of. I've dealt with men like him before. They don't back down easily." Keanu nodded, understanding her fear, but feeling increasingly restless. He wasn't used to feeling powerless, and the thought of sitting back while Amara and Ava were in danger was unbearable. "Then let's call someone," he said. "The police, a lawyer, anyone who can help." Amara hesitated, chewing her lip. "I don't know if that's a good idea," she admitted. "The last thing I need is more attention. What if they think I'm unfit to take care of Ava?" Keanu's heart ached at her words. He could see the weight of her fears pressing down on her, and he hated that she felt so trapped. "You're an amazing mother, Amara," he said gently. "No one can take that away from you. But you don't have to carry all of this on your own." As the hours passed, Keanu's protective instincts only grew stronger. He stayed late into the night, sitting by the window and watching for any sign of the man outside. Amara eventually drifted off to sleep on the couch, her exhaustion finally catching up with her. Keanu stayed awake, his mind racing as he tried to piece together a plan. Outside, the man lingered in the shadows, his presence like a storm cloud on the horizon. Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something or someone. The thought made his stomach turn. What if this wasn't just about Ava's father? What if the man had more sinister intentions? Around 3 in the morning, a faint sound jolted Keanu from his thoughts. It was the creak of a floorboard, soft but unmistakable. His eyes snapped to the hallway, and his heart began to pound. He stood slowly, careful not to make a sound, and moved toward the noise. As he reached the corner, he saw a figure standing just outside the door to Ava's room. "Hey!" Keanu's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. The figure froze for a split second before bolting toward the front door. Keanu lunged forward, his adrenaline kicking in as he tried to grab that intruder. But the man was fast, slipping out the door and disappearing into the night before Keanu could catch him. Amara woke with a start, her eyes wide with panic. "What happened?" she asked, clutching Ava tightly as the baby began to cry. Keanu's chest heaved as he tried to calm himself. "Someone was in here," he said, his voice tight with anger. "I don't know who, but they're gone now." Amara's face went pale, and she hugged Ava even closer. "This is too much," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't keep living like this." Keanu knelt beside her, his expression softening. "You won't have to," he said firmly. "We'll figure this out, Amara. I promise." But even as he said the words, Keanu knew that things were escalating. The man wasn't just watching anymore, he was making his move. And if they didn't act soon, the consequences could be devastating. The stakes had never been higher, and the clock was ticking. The weight of what had just happened settled heavily in the room. Amara's arms tightened protectively around Ava, her face etched with fear and exhaustion. Keanu paced the small living room, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the intrusion. The sight of that figure standing so close to Ava's door was burned into his mind, and the thought of what could have happened if he hadn't been there sent a chill down his spine. "We can't stay here," Amara said suddenly, her voice trembling but resolute. It's not safe anymore. I'll pack up and take Ava somewhere else. Maybe to a shelter until I can figure things out. Keanu stopped pacing and turned to her, his face filled with both concern and determination. Amara, no. You shouldn't have to uproot your life because of him. This isn't your fault. You've done nothing wrong. But what choice do I have? She asked, her voice breaking. I can't keep looking over my shoulder every second, wondering if he's going to come back. I have to protect Ava. Keanu knelt down in front of her, his voice calm but firm. Then let's protect her together. Running might seem like the easiest option, but it won't solve the problem. He'll just keep following you. We need to face this head-on. Amara hesitated, her eyes searching his face for reassurance. She wanted to believe him, but the fear that had been building inside her for weeks was hard to shake. Before she could respond, a sharp knock at the door shattered the fragile sense of calm in the room. Both of them froze, their eyes snapping toward the door. Keanu motioned for Amara to stay back as he moved cautiously toward the door. His heart was pounding, but his expression remained steady. He peered through the peephole and frowned. Standing on the other side was a woman, older, with a worn but kind face and a look of quiet urgency in her eyes. It's okay, Keanu said softly to Amara, opening the door just a crack. Can I help you? The woman glanced over his shoulder, her gaze landing on Amara and Ava. She sighed, as if relieved, before speaking. My name is Delilah, she said. I think we need to talk. It's about the man who's been following her. Amara stepped closer, her fear momentarily replaced by confusion. You know him? She asked, her voice wary. Delilah nodded. He's my nephew. His name is Marcus, and I think you both need to hear the truth about why he's here. The room fell silent as Delilah's words hung in the air. Amara's grip on Ava tightened, and Keanu's jaw clenched as he stepped aside to let the woman in. She moved slowly, her posture heavy with the weight of whatever she was about to reveal. I've been trying to stop him. Delilah began, her voice trembling slightly. But Marcus, he's not in his right mind. A few months ago, he found out about Ava, and he convinced himself that she's the answer to all his problems. Amara's face went pale. What does that mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Delilah hesitated, her eyes full of regret. Marcus owes money to some dangerous people. He's desperate, and in his twisted logic, he thinks that if he can take Ava and prove he's her father, he might be able to use her to get some kind of leverage, money, sympathy, I don't know. He's not thinking straight. The room felt like it was closing in. Keanu's hands curled into fists at his sides, his protective instincts surging. And you've just been letting him do this? He demanded, his voice low but filled with anger. Delilah shook her head quickly. No, I've been trying to stop him, but I'm just one person. He's stubborn and reckless, and he doesn't listen to anyone. I came here tonight because I knew he'd try something. I couldn't let him hurt her or Ava. Amara's mind raced, her thoughts a chaotic swirl of fear and disbelief. She had always known Ava's father was trouble, but this was something she could never have imagined. What are we supposed to do? She asked, her voice shaking. How do we stop him? Delilah looked at her, her expression both determined and sorrowful. I can help you, she said. But you need to trust me. Marcus is dangerous, but he's also predictable. If we can get ahead of him, we can end this. Keanu exchanged a glance with Amara, his protective instincts warring with his skepticism. What's your plan? He asked, his voice steady but cautious. Delilah took a deep breath, her gaze steady. We need to make him believe he's already lost. If he thinks the police or the courts are involved, he'll back off. But we have to act fast before he gets desperate. Amara's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I'll do whatever it takes to keep Ava safe. Keanu placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll do this together, he said. You're not alone in this. But even as they began to discuss their next steps, a sense of unease lingered in the room. The stakes had never been higher, and the threat of Marcus loomed larger than ever. They had a plan, but would it be enough? And what would happen if Marcus decided to make his move before they were ready? The clock was ticking, and the tension was reaching a breaking point. The plan had been set in motion with careful precision. Delilah stayed close, her experience with Marcus guiding their every step. Keanu, ever the protector, had insisted on being the one to confront Marcus when the time came. Amara, though trembling with nerves, found strength in the unity of their small team. She kept Ava close, her resolve unwavering despite the storm brewing around them. The next evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the neighborhood, they waited. Delilah had reached out to Marcus earlier, feeding him just enough information to lure him into a trap. She told him that Amara was planning to take Ava out of town tonight, and that this was his last chance to claim his daughter. Marcus had taken the bait, his desperation clouding his judgment. Keanu positioned himself in the apartment, just out of sight from the front door, while Amara and Ava stayed safely in the bedroom. Delilah remained downstairs, ready to signal if Marcus showed up. The plan was simple: confront him, record his threats, and ensure the authorities had enough evidence to act. But as the minutes ticked by, the tension in the air grew thicker, every creak of the floorboards amplifying their anxiety. When the knock finally came, it was sharp and impatient. Delilah's voice echoed up the stairwell, trying to keep Marcus calm. "She's up there," Delilah said, her voice steady but laced with false urgency. "But you need to handle this the right way, Marcus. Don't do something you'll regret." Keanu's heart pounded as he heard the heavy footsteps climbing the stairs. He clenched his fists, his breath steady but purposeful. When the door swung open, Marcus stepped inside, his eyes darting around the room with a mix of anger and desperation. He was taller than Keanu expected, with a wiry frame and a wild look in his eyes that spoke of a man pushed to his limits. "Where is she?" Marcus demanded, his voice harsh and crackling with tension. "Where's my daughter?" Keanu stepped into view, his presence commanding but calm. "You need to leave, Marcus," he said, his voice firm. "You're not taking Ava. Not now, not ever." Marcus froze for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he sized up the man standing between him and his goal. "Who are you?" he spat. "You think you can stop me?" "I know I can," Keanu replied, his voice unwavering. "And if you try anything, the police will be here before you can blink." Marcus sneered, but Keanu could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. "You think you're so tough," Marcus said, his voice dripping with venom. "But you don't know what I've been through. I'm her father. I have rights." "You lost those rights the moment you put her and Amara in danger?" Keanu shot back. "You're not here because you care about Ava. You're here because you think you can use her." The words hit their mark, and Marcus's facade cracked. He lunged forward, but Keanu was ready. In one swift movement, he blocked Marcus's advance, forcing him back with a strength that made Marcus hesitate. Behind them, the faint red and blue glow of police lights began to fill the room, a signal that Delilah had called them as planned. Marcus froze, his eyes darting toward the window as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the stairwell. He turned to run, but two officers stepped into the apartment, blocking his escape. "Marcus Lee, you're under arrest," one of them said, their voice calm but commanding. As the officers led Marcus away, his protest fading into the distance, Keanu finally exhaled, the adrenaline slowly leaving his system. Amara emerged from the bedroom, clutching Ava tightly, tears streaming down her face as relief washed over her. She looked at Keanu, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what we would have done without you." But just as the relief began to settle, Delilah's voice broke through the quiet. "There's something you need to know," she said, her tone serious. Marcus wasn't acting alone. The words sent a chill through the room, and Amara's eyes widened in fear. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Delilah hesitated, her expression heavy with guilt. He wasn't the one who found out about Ava. Someone else told him. Someone who wanted to hurt you. Keanu's brow furrowed, his protective instincts flaring again. "Who?" he asked, his voice sharp. Delilah looked down, her hands trembling. "Ava's grandmother," she said quietly. "She's been pulling the strings all along, and she's not done yet." The revelation hit like a thunderclap, turning their moment of victory into a chilling reminder that the battle was far from over. The stakes had just been raised, and the true threat was only beginning to reveal itself.